All right, so today what we want to do is we want to establish or move from some of the conclusions that we've made thus far. So we've talked about that there's essentially good reason to think that God exists, essentially the theistic God. We've talked about just some of the aspects of truth. So we're just trying to move in a logical fashion that would get to the specifics of Christianity. So one of those things that we want to do is we want to talk about the next concept in that line of reasoning, which would be miracles. Are miracles possible? Are they philosophically possible? Or is there room in philosophy for the concept of a miracle? Now, of course, if we're just going in strict fashion of what is possible, if God is possible, if we have good reason to think that God exists, well then someone like C.S. Lewis would say, well, if you admit God, if we've gotten to the concept of God, that that's possible, or even if we've gotten to the more radical claim that he actually does exist, well then we can't just by fiat say, well therefore, or even still, miracles are impossible. As Lewis says, if you admit God, you have to admit miracle. Now one of the most important aspects would be that if God did in fact create the universe, and we've given one possible argument that would show that the universe had a beginning, so therefore it would need a cause, the most likely explanation, inference to the best explanation, would be that God did this because of some of the things that we went through, some of those premises, some of those conclusions that we tried to work through in those initial arguments. Well, anything after that concept, anything that flows from or follows after the existence of God and the existence or the creation of the universe, that would be the biggest miracle. So any such miracles such as some dude getting swallowed by a fish, or Jesus being raised from the dead, or the Red Sea being parted, whatever, all of those sorts of things would be a joke in comparison to the creation of something from nothing, the beginning of the universe. But again, remember, we've even talked about how Aquinas has a particular version that he'll grant you the eternity of the universe. We don't even necessarily need to worry about that right at this point, but just as a reminder as in regards to the arguments proper to God's relation or cause of the universe. So here we are with miracles. Are miracles possible? Because before we even talk about the scriptures in any shape, form, or fashion, before we even move to the scriptures, they contain miracles. Most people's objection is that, hey, we can't trust these as historically reliable or as telling any sort of actual truth because we live in an age where we see the silliness or the absurdity in believing a particular document because it has miracles. Again, that's a philosophical assumption. That is a presupposition or a predilection towards a certain worldview before actually looking at the evidence or the arguments for miracles. Now, how did we come to the state where miracles aren't taken seriously? Now, first at the outset, let me say this. I don't believe every miracle story that comes down the pipe. If I turn on the television and I see some preacher swinging around his cloth or whatever it may be and he's sweating up, whatever the case may be, I'm just like you. I'm probably not going to believe that. I'm probably not going to believe most people that come up and tell me that they've experienced a miracle. But that's not to say that I don't believe that miracles are possible. Well, why? Because I believe that in a certain sense, one, my worldview allows for the possibility of miracles, but I also think as the entire purpose of this series is to show that there are reasons to think such things. So I have reasons to think that miracles are possible. But I don't want you to confuse the distinction that just because I believe that miracles are possible, that I believe every incredulous story that comes down the turnpike, so to speak. I don't believe everything, just as you shouldn't believe everything. So with that said, let's look at some of the arguments against miracles. Some of these are very old, but they're still being used now in regard to trying to show the absurdity of the miracles. So one that we would look at would be something like Benedict Spinoza's argument. Without going through the details of that, it's just going to basically boil down to this, and you've heard this before, I'm sure, that natural laws are immutable. You just can't change natural laws. You can't break natural laws. And of course, a miracle by definition is just a breaking of a natural law. Now, Spinoza was a pantheist of sorts, so that would follow, or that imports into a lot of his particular worldview why he makes this argument. But we don't need to know any of that for this moment. For the present purpose, all we need to know is that Spinoza talks about how miracles are these violations of natural law, that they can't be broken. Just at the outset, we could just toss out the possibility that, well, what if God had ordained from all time, from all eternity, that this particular thing would happen? Say, imagine if a stick shift or a 5-speed had been in first gear for all eternity, then it went down into second gear, and then went back into first gear again. You would see nothing had been broken in that sequence, even though no one had seen second gear up to that point in time. So that's just a possibility, but let's get to the real, to the crux of the matter. We can do away with Spinoza's argument by just arguing or saying that the premise is just not true, that miracles are violations of natural law. And we can show this by a few examples pretty easily. All right, so this is just a simple example. Ronald Nash was a philosopher, I believe out of somewhere in Kentucky. Don't hold that against him, he's a great guy. Anyway, this is his example. He was, I believe, somewhere in the Eastern Bloc, maybe Russia. But basically, he tried to make the point that, look, miracles aren't violations of natural law. This was his example. I think he had a box, but we'll use a paper bag at this moment. This is the universe. This paper bag is going to represent the universe. These are things in the universe. Keys, sunglasses, whatever. So this bag as a whole represents the universe. All of this stuff in here just represents everything contained within the universe. So Nash's example was just to say, all right, here's the universe. I'll be God in a sense. So I can reach into the universe and manipulate or move around particular things at my will without necessarily violating any natural law. So with that example, he's just trying to say if the universe is a box or a bag and things in it represent all the material things within the universe, then God can move or dictate or do whatever he wants to do with those particular things. But let's look at it in this sense. We can see this even probably more clearly by just throwing an apple up into the air and catching it. If I catch an apple as it's falling from the air, am I violating a natural law about when it doesn't hit the ground? Am I violating gravity? No. I'm just intervening within natural laws. So if I am running and I stop, I'm not violating any law of inertia or any Newtonian physics. I'm just intervening to stop myself, or I'm just intervening to catch a ball that's falling, or an apple that's falling, or I'm whatever. I mean, this just seems to be such a common sense notion that we can intervene without violating natural law. Now, if we can do that, well, then it just seems obvious. But of course, then God could do that. God could just intervene, say with the Red Sea, to push apart the Red Sea, or to whatever the case may be, in the same sense. So that's just a short, but I feel a sufficient rebuttal to Spinoza's argument that we just don't have to define natural laws as immutable so long as we're just saying that they're being intervened or acted upon. All right, so now let's look at the Scottish skeptic David Hume's argument. Now, his argument is a little more nuanced because it's not quite so radical, yet it's just as powerful in its intended effect. So Hume's argument is essentially going to say this: I'm not going to say that miracles don't happen. Maybe they do. But my argument, if it works, is just to say that even if miracles do happen, you shouldn't believe them unless you want to be uncounted as wise. You're not a wise man if you believe them. So obviously, right off the bat, we see why this argument is just as powerful, yet not so radical, because Hume is not even claiming the impossibility of, say, the miraculous. He's just trying to claim that they may happen. I'll give you that. And remember, when you're in an argument and somebody concedes one of your major points and then says, and you're still wrong, and this is why, that's kind of a scary thing. So Hume says, let's just go ahead and do his argument. He says, a natural law is by definition just a regular occurrence. He says a miracle, just by definition, is something that happens rarely. Now, a wise man is always going to proportion his belief to evidence. He's going to proportion his belief to the greater amount of evidence, always, if he's going to be wise. Now, here's the catch. There's always going to be more evidence for the regular, for the natural law, for the regular occurrences, than there ever will be for the rare, or for a miraculous occurrence. Therefore, a wise man should never believe in miracles. You catch that? So let's just try to put that in layman's terms. If you are a wise man, you're always going to have this belief system at play or at work that's going to go with where evidence goes. If I see a miracle, that's fantastic, but what I've just seen is rare. All of my life experience, you may even say all of the experience we have collectively as humankind, is going to argue against what you just saw. Say a man levitating or whatever the case may be. So even though he may have legitimately levitated or done whatever, all of this vast experience backs up the claim or backs up the premise that no matter what you see right here, the evidence will always be greater than somebody actually did this over here. Whatever that particular miracle may be, levitation, rising from the dead, water into wine, whatever it may be, our life experience, our experiences in humankind the evidence is always going to be greater than this particular one little rare occurrence that just happened to happen. Therefore, if you're wise, maybe a miracle, but if you're wise, you're not even going to believe that because the evidence is just not there for it. Now we see why this argument is so powerful, because it takes a step back and concedes, yeah, miracles may happen. But if you're intelligent, you're not going to believe that. Now, our first clue should be at least to the effect of, the first red flag rather, should be, wait a minute, any argument that a priori, right from the onset, any argument that says don't believe what you just saw, that in and of itself should probably be a red flag that there might possibly be something wrong with that particular argument. So for instance, imagine that you are on an island somewhere, no one else is around, and your best friend gets up and starts flying around in circles on the island. Well, yes, uniform experience would seem to be that people can't fly, no argument there. But is it really intelligent at that point to say he's really not flying? Now that's not to say you don't investigate it, you try to go through every possible scenario that you can, but at the end of the day, if there's no explanation, are you really crazy to believe that he's flying around? Well, I would say, yeah, you probably are crazy. But in that context, we would at the very least, have to take that seriously. But forget that, that's not even our point. Our point is going to be really to say this. One of Hume's premise is wrong. Sometimes the evidence for the rare is greater than the evidence for the occurring over and over and over. So for instance, let's just look at one point. Let's say that somebody hits a hole-in-one in golf. Well, let's say that guy has never hit a hole-in-one in golf, ever. Let's say that it's the first golf game in the history of whatever. Let's say that since the time that golf has began, from the time that it's been played, no one has ever hit a hole-in-one. Let's say that a bunch of people are standing around, they watch it, they see the ball, they go in the hole, they see it go in the hole, and everybody says, wait a minute. We just saw something that's literally never happened in the entire history of the universe. We can't believe that. Well, no, at that point in time, because of the context of the surrounding situation, the evidence is greater that this actually happened. Or look at it this way. A lot of our forensic sciences or things that deal with the past, historical studies, they can never be repeated. History itself has only happened once throughout the period of what? History. It's happened once. Yet we're reasonable to believe that those particular things happen. Or let's say that your own birthday, your birthday, you being born is an astronomically crazy event that can't be replicated, yet it happened once, it won't happen again, yet you're sane to believe that you actually had a birthday at one point. Or let's look at it this way. What about the origin of life, period? However it started, whether we want to say, God, whether we want to say some evolutionary type methodology, whatever, that only happened once. We don't see life popping into existence from non-life. So even that could have only happened once, yet we should say, well, we can't actually believe that life actually arose. So we see that really is not necessarily true, that the evidence is always greater for the regular than it is for the rare, because we have to look at the context of the situation. Now, if you want to study this in great detail, there's something called Bayes' theorem. And what Bayes' theorem does is it just goes through a complex mathematical formula, for lack of better words there, lack of better terms, that just shows, it tries to place all of these things in context to show you why, to give you even a greater depth of understanding why the evidence a lot of times is greater for that particular occurrence than it would be necessarily for the regular occurrences. Now here's another point that Dr. Geisler brings up. If a miracle by definition is rare, well, you can't punish it for being rare. Because of course, if it happened all the time, it wouldn't be a miracle. No one would have any reason to believe that something happened supernaturally or for whatever other purpose. It has to be rare so that it will be seen to be something that it goes against our normal occurrence to prove what it's trying to prove. You can't punish it for being rare. That's Dr. Geisler's point. Now, C.S. Lewis actually goes straight at the heart of Hume's argument, and this to me is one of the most persuasive arguments against Hume. Lewis just basically says this. He says, Hume is arguing in a circle. He says, because every time a miracle would happen, you already have to assume that that couldn't happen. But if you already assume that that couldn't have happened, well then of course no miracle can ever happen, because you can never count any evidence for that particular miracle, no matter how far back you go, because you're always going to assume that the other miracles are not true, saying that uniform experience has counted against those. So you can never actually make a case for any miracle, no matter how far back you go, because you're always having to assume that the other miracles previously are false as well. Well, of course, if no miracles happen, well then it's no surprise that no miracles have ever happened, or that you shouldn't believe any miracles. So I'd like to share that quote from Lewis, because he articulates this point very finely, because it's in the form of just written down, which collects his thoughts very carefully. So let's read that. This is what Lewis has to say. He says, now of course we must agree with Hume that if there is absolutely uniform experience against miracles, if, in other words, they have never happened, why then they never have. Unfortunately, we know the experience against them to be uniform only if we know that all the reports of them are false. And we can know all the reports to be false only if we know already that miracles have never occurred. In fact, we're arguing in a circle. All right, guys, so in conclusion, I want to say this, because this is a very personal subject to me. I realize that some of you watching this may be saddled with or burdened with some particular ailment, whether that be physical or psychological or whatever the case may be. I myself have struggled with a back issue for roughly a decade now, over close to 10 years, at least the time of this filming. My family and I, we've spent via insurance, we've tried all sorts of things to fix this problem. And sometimes it's worse than others. Sometimes I can function. Sometimes that's not necessarily the case. At this point, in regards to the miracles that we're talking about, God hasn't healed me. And that's not to say that I haven't asked, on multiple occasions. So I don't want to come across as if miracles are just fly-by-night, or that they happen all the time, or that God does it all the time, whatever the case may be. But we're just trying to point out and make the case that it's possible. It's possible. Now again, I hope that one day we can update this particular series and say, hey, God healed my back for whatever reason. But let's say that He never does. That doesn't refute or get rid of the logical connection between the possibility of miracles happening and the impossibility just because I myself don't particularly experience a miracle. Now, let me also say this. This would be an argument from experience in some way, and I'm not using this as an argument proper. But a lot of times people will say, if I see a miracle, if I were to see a particular miracle, then I would of course believe. Sad to say, that just may not be the case. And we'll get into this later, but if the Gospels are at all reliable, people saw miracles and still didn't believe in Jesus or believe Jesus' claims in regard to Himself. But let me just use one from my own life. When I was younger, I had a cousin. Now remember, I'm just like you in the sense I don't believe all these miracle stories. I don't believe everything that comes down the pike. I would say I probably don't believe 100 out of 100 stories. 99 out of 100 would even be a stretch to me. But this might be the 99, the one out of those 100. When I was young, my cousin was paralyzed. Actually went to this campus. Was a student here at this campus. This is my own flesh and blood. This is not something I saw on television. This is not something that I read about in a particular book. But she was paralyzed through a very unfortunate accident. And I won't go into all the details of that right now. We can put up a link that you can actually listen to that particular story if you would like to. She couldn't move, she couldn't do anything. And instantaneously, a man prayed over her, a man who, in his prayer, did not say, God always wants you to be healed, God is going to fix everything, any of that. He even said in his prayer, I don't know why God heals some people, I don't know why God doesn't heal some individuals. And immediately she stood up, walked, and to this day has been absolutely fine. She even had female-related issues as to where she wasn't supposed to have children as a result of this accident. Immediately, all of those biological systems started to function as well. Again, we'll put up a link so you can listen to that. But if that's true, and I can't argue with that particular experience. Again, that's my own flesh, that's my own blood that you see something amazing happen to and change the course of their life. I can't argue with that. Now again, our concern is more on the logical connection between the possibility or the impossibility of miracles. We just want to open the door to say that they're possible. And then we also have to take seriously some of these aspects that we may have experienced or may not have experienced. So we'd like to leave you with that.